This week on Quadriga, Germany 25 years after the fall of the wall. On Sunday, Germany commemorates the historic opening of the border between East and West. Millions celebrated their freedom to travel and speak out. East Germany would soon cease to exist as the two Germanys reunited. After the wall fell, Germany was long preoccupied with its own affairs. But a quarter century on, questions are being raised about Berlin's responsibilities in the world. Should it get more involved, or does Germany already have too much power? Your host this week, Ali Aslan.
Hello and welcome to a new edition of Quadriga. This upcoming November 9th will mark the 25th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. And the city is getting ready for the celebrations at exactly the sites where the wall once stood. The question we want to address on today's show is, what kind of country has Germany become over the last 25 years? And for that, I am happy to welcome three guests, all who've been following the story very closely. Welcome to Michael Stürmer, who's the senior correspondent at the German newspaper Die Welt. He's a renowned historian and has served for many years as political advisor to former Chancellor Helmut Kohl. Erik Kirschbaum is a Berlin correspondent for Reuters, the world's largest news agency. A US citizen, he's been covering German politics since 1989. And last but not least, Dorota Danielewicz is a Polish author and journalist based in Berlin. Previously, she reported for the German public broadcaster RBB and has served as the Berlin correspondent for Radio France International. Michael Stürmer, November 9th, 1989 is usually a date that generally most people tend to remember where they were and what they did at exactly the moment.
One of those dates, yes.
Exactly. And so my question to you is, where were you when you heard about the news, and what were you doing?
I think I was in my office in the evening in Ebenhausen, because I was the head of the Ebenhausen think tank at the time. The more interesting story is 2 days before, on 7th November, I happened to be in the Reichstag. We had a conference on security affairs, and there was a nearby, in front of the Brandenburg Gate, on the western side, of course, there was an American television team, and they had built up very high cameras. And I went over, walking, and asked them, what are you waiting for? And they said, it was an American team. We don't know, but something's going to happen. Very interesting story. I think it's a mystery story, but why I tell this, there was, for us, the people who were sort of had antennas and sensitivities, it was in the air, and that is the secret, because then these misplaced, stumbling words of Schabowski at a press conference could ignite a situation which was a day before would have been deadly serious, and now there was a kind of superior command. You have to let people go.
Erik Kirschbaum, apparently the Americans knew before the Germans did, even in the pre-NSA era. That's pretty interesting to note. But the question I have, where were you? I mean, you started your stint as a Berlin correspondent in 1989.
Yeah, I was actually in Frankfurt at the time, Frankfurt am Main, as that was called in those days, or is called now. And yeah, I was working in Frankfurt. But I think that says a lot about the German mentality, too, that the Germans talked about unification, but nobody believed it was going to happen. They thought Bonn was going to be the capital forever. You saw Germans clinging to Bonn even for a few years after unification. Bonn is going to be the capital. I couldn't believe it. A lot of people outside of Germany couldn't believe it either, that they wanted to keep the capital in Bonn. And that sort of provincial mentality still exists in Germany 25 years later. You still see divisions between East and West Germany, which it's hard for me to believe. I know people in East Berlin who never go to...
They've always been there.
Yeah, but I know East Berliners who never go to West Berlin, and West Berliners who don't go to East Berlin. Yeah, there's really divisions.
They couldn't come to visit us. No, sorry.
No, I see a lot of divisions in Germany still today. I see people who don't go east and Westerners who don't go to the east. I see pay disparities here. I see language disparities. I see voting disparities. The Canadian astronaut even took a picture.
We eat in different ways. Yeah. We have different appetites. Yes.
But this Ossi-Wessi thing is still there 25 years later. And true. For an American, we saw you hugging yourselves when you came across the walls. And it's hard for us to believe, hey, what's gone wrong here? You talk to taxi drivers in Berlin and they complain they want the wall back. It amazes me sometimes. I mean, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but there are still a lot of lingering divisions here in Germany 25 years on.
But they are most of them are much older than what you think they are. They go back hundreds of years. That's why we live in this form of federalism. We couldn't stand, the Bavarians couldn't stand living, eating, drinking the same way as the people of North Frisia. We are very different. And in the 19th century, when really population movements started, people would move from east to west and not from west to east. Berlin was a bit of an exception because it was such a monster city which grew enormously, but 3/4 of the Berliners came from Silesia and East Prussia.
Yes. But Dorota, there's a point that Erik is making, namely, is the German reunification a success story? And there's a recent poll that came out, pretty interesting. 75% of East Germans say, yes, they consider reunification a success, while only 50%, only 1 in 2 Westerners would agree. What does it tell you?
I suppose the point is the Western German had to pay a lot for the unification. There were like 2 billion mark going towards DDR in the first years of reunification, and the Western German remember this. And by the way, the Poles are very proud of managing the transformation without any help from outside. So maybe this is the point. But I personally think that the reunification was a very successful story. There are always problems, and there are always, I suppose we need some more generation to forget the differences between East and West and to get better along. But of course it is a great story, and the whole world looks at Germany and Berlin and observes how the people here manage to get together.
But there are some facts, Michael Stürmer, that cannot be denied, namely that in many ways, and in that Erik Kirschbaum is not mistaken, Germany is still divided. Let's look at the facts. Income is still much lower in the East, higher unemployment rate in the East. Less young people live in the eastern part of Germany. These divisions that still exist 25 years after, surprise you?
Not at all. Not at all. It's the most natural thing in the world. If you live in Munich, you live in a very rich part of the country. If you live in northern Bavaria and Franconia, you live in a comparatively poor part, which isn't much richer than the people of Thuringia or of Saxony, a little bit to the north. These are natural differences, very old, and people tend to go, the more active people tend to go to Stuttgart or Munich or Düsseldorf, and not to Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, the proverbial part of Germany which Bismarck already said, everything happens 100 years later, and that's why when doomsday comes, I'll be in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern.
But why does the German government pay its workers in the East 15% less than in the West?
A little less than in the West. Yes, personally I think it's a big mistake, but apart from that, everything is much cheaper in the East. If you live in Munich, you can hardly afford a one-room apartment. If the same money would give you in Erfurt or Dresden, would give you a very nice big apartment.
Why is the voting difference so different? Why do a third of the Easterners still vote for the post-communist party? If you look at the political maps of Germany after an election, it looks like the country's still divided.
Because A, they are the losers, the voters of the Linke are the losers. B, they still have their old networks. There's also a lot of hidden money around. So that explains, and then there is some bitterness. You also have Die Linke is not only an East German party, it's also a West German party, although the composition is very different. Right. You have the old nomenclatura and their friends and family in the East, and in the West it's the radical students, God knows what. And that's why in Tübingen or Marburg they're much stronger than anywhere else.
And unfortunately, one thing has to be noted, right-wing parties, extremist parties also enjoy a much greater rate of success in eastern part of this country. Why is that, Michael Stürmer, compared to the West?
Well, that is really a very interesting question, and that shows that 40 years of separate development, where there were hardly any foreigners except Russians, and some Vietnamese, did not produce the same kind of somewhat, I wouldn't say globalized, but certainly Europeanized mentality that you have in the West. And anyway, there are very old patterns in this. You can trace radical left-wing voting back to the early 19th century, just after the French Revolution, just as you can trace right-wing voting back certainly to the time before 1914 and most certainly to the early 1930s. So there are traditional patterns.
And the reunification process, it's already been mentioned by Dorota, Erik, was not inexpensive, to say the least. Up until now, 2 trillion euros have been spent to bring both parts up to par, if you will. Do you think that's also part of the reason why Westerners are not so enthusiastic about reunification?
Sure, that's a lot of money to go in that direction. I mean, it's not only the West Germans who are paying it, East Germans are also paying the solidarity tax that's still being collected, even though it was only supposed to last a few years. West Germans had a prosperous world before the wall fell. That was probably not going to last much longer anyway, so that was on the way out anyway. So there's an impression, probably certainly among a lot of West Germans, hey, we don't have this prosperous country we have anymore, and the East Germans are the ones to blame, which I think adds to the tensions. Definitely, it's a very expensive project, but it's a successful one. I mean, I think nobody would deny United Germany is not a successful, thriving, prosperous, and a very important country in the middle of Europe.
And it's not just Germany that's thriving, Dorota, but also the city of Berlin, by all accounts, has become a very chic, hip place to be. In Berlin, mostly accredited to being the most coolest capital in Europe these days. Now, you've lived in Berlin, obviously, for a very long time. You've even written a book about the spirit, the soul of the city of Berlin. How has Berlin changed over the course of the last 25 years?
So I live in Berlin since 1981. And I also knew East Berlin in the 80s because I had a special passport, consular pass, for Polish people living abroad. I was the only one in my family who, I don't know why, could get this passport. So I could go to East Berlin without paying, without changing any money.
Exchange, yeah.
So it was easy for me. So I had friends there. I went to the other side, and I knew both parts of the city quite well. How Berlin changed, you know, the first thing is, if you go walking through Berlin, you just listen to English. Today also we speak English in the stock show, of course, but you hear so many English-speaking people in the city. That's incredible. And they are not only tourists, also in some shops, cafes, and everywhere. And I have the feeling you have to learn English in Berlin to live here very, very soon.
Or Russian or Hebrew.
Or Russian or Hebrew, yes. There are 20,000. There are 20,000 young Israeli people living in Berlin, and this new international flair. West Berlin was international, but not so much as today. You know, the diplomats from all over the world. Of course, the government. This is very special. There are many, how we say, Parallelwelten, like a parallel words in the city, which are very interesting, fascinating. But still, Berlin is a city which is poor. It is not sexy, I suppose, but it's a poor city. We have no industry, we have no money, we have a big amount of young people which are very creative in internet business, but it's still a poor city.
But there are pockets of West Berlin that haven't changed at all since the wall fell. You can be out there in Charlottenburg or Spandau, and it feels like it did almost 25 years ago. Same if you're in Marzahn. The only difference is there's not Trabis in front of the door anymore. There's Volkswagens, but it still feels like you're in an East Bloc city in parts of East Berlin, and it still feels like provincial West Berlin in parts of West Berlin.
Michael Stürmer, these days, of course, we see, and also in the opener today, we see the pictures from November 9th, 1989, the people who came rushing over, who were exuberant, they were enthusiastic. But to be frank, of course, not all countries shared that enthusiasm initially anyway. We know what then UK Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and French President Mitterrand thought of reunification.
Well, history is a strong factor in political life and in everyday life.
They certainly thought that Germany would probably become, or they feared that Germany would become too powerful again. Did you, in hindsight, you understand their sense of concern?
Not only in hindsight, even then, we were very careful. I was, as you mentioned, an aide to Chancellor Kohl, and we were very careful to speak about reunification. We spoke about crisis management, we spoke about the management of partition, and we were not talking all the time about reunification. There was a fundamental philosophical assumption that this was one nation in two different political forms, and that the dividing line was particularly painful because it was the dividing line between two different, really different worlds, the Soviet world and the liberal American transatlantic world. So that was the overall situation. Reunification was, as Chancellor Kohl said, not on the agenda. And in German, it means Tagesordnung. It doesn't mean, it means day-to-day business. So that was pretty obvious. But at the same time, for the legitimacy of West Germany, much as for the legitimacy of East Germany, the communist part, you needed to sort of remind yourself from time to time that this was a national fragment. And that this was a situation which didn't look very stable either from the Russian point of view or from the French or British point of view. So how would this chemistry between a very important part of the Western system and a quite important part of the Eastern system, important in industrial terms but also in military terms, how would that converge? It could have been a very explosive mix. And thanks to a number of people who thankfully were in place on the American side, on the Russian side, on the German side, not to mention Maggie Thatcher, and Mitterrand, who was also playing a weird game. And in the end, of course, he had something to negotiate, and that was the common currency.
Well, it's not a given, but by all accounts, German reunification can be considered a success. Germany now is blossoming, has blossomed into a unified country, and by all accounts, a very powerful country. What is Germany's role in the world? How has it changed over the course of the last 25 years? Let's have a look.
Germany's role in the world has changed a lot in 25 years. World leaders turn frequently to Chancellor Angela Merkel for her expertise and opinion. Germany is in the thick of international negotiations on political, economic, and even military affairs. Berlin played a key role in slapping sanctions on Russia because of the Ukraine crisis. After much debate, it is now supplying weapons to Kurdish militia battling the Islamic State in Iraq. German volunteers are helping fight the Ebola epidemic in West Africa. But because of its economic power, some expect Germany to take the lead on issues such as the European financial crisis, while critics say Berlin already throws its weight around too much.
Well, Dorota, we just saw the catch-22 that Germany finds itself in mostly when it comes to international relations, namely, basically, you know, if it does decide, then it's Germany imposing its will. If it doesn't, then it's reluctant to lead. From a Polish standpoint, now we know that Lech Walesa has just spoken out a couple of days ago. For him, it's essential that Germany assumes its leadership role in the world. Would you agree?
Yes, I would agree, because Germany is a central and very important country in the European Union, and also it has like a bridge role, connecting role between East and West through Poland, of course, and also in between France, Poland, and in the Triangle of Weimar. It also proved its bending role between East and West in the conflict with Ukraine, which was very, very important also for Poland.
Let's be frank and be honest, because we talked about the concerns on the part of Mitterrand and Thatcher. You, as somebody who's originally from Poland,
yes.
And we know the history, of course. Were you concerned, as somebody from Poland, that Germany would become too dominant, too powerful again?
I wasn't, because I was already living in Germany, but there were many Poles concerned after the reunification that Germany may become too powerful. Yes, it was, you know, like 60–70% of the Poles in the beginning of the 90s were concerned about this.
Erik Kirschbaum, the question these days we're leading in Germany is not necessarily if Germany is too powerful, but rather why it's still so reluctant in many ways to engage when it comes to international affairs.
Yeah, I mean, they're damned if they do and they're damned if they don't, and the whole leading from behind that Germany's done from a long time. But it is an important issue, and I mean, as an American, when I saw Germany's attitude on Afghanistan, I was really surprised. Germany was in Afghanistan, but they didn't want to go to the south because that was too dangerous. And I used to sit there thinking, during the Cold War, the Americans were in the West, and they were sending their soldiers to West Berlin to defend West Berlin, where it was very dangerous. You know, so what are the mothers in Kansas City from 60 years ago thinking when Germany doesn't want to, United Germany doesn't want to send any troops to help in the southern part of Afghanistan where it's too dangerous? So, I mean, that summarized for me the whole problem with Germany today. They profited from NATO, they enjoyed the benefits of NATO, but they don't want to pull their full weight here with NATO now. I mean, Germany spends 1% of its GDP on defense spending.
Having promised double.
Yeah, it's just way too little. They profited more than any other country during the Cold War from NATO. And what's Germany doing today? They're reducing their defense spending. They're the richest country in Europe, and they're shrinking their defense budget towards 1% of GDP.
Michael Stürmer, Germany is not assuming its role as a leader in international affairs, says Erik Kirschbaum. Is he right?
He is absolutely right, yes. We are a nation of shopkeepers, not heroes. And we are very opportunistic. And we've promised all kinds of things to NATO, and we don't keep our promises. And now we are in a situation, you said in your introduction that Germany is powerful in all dimensions. Well, in the military dimension, Germany is boxing far below its weight. Half of our air force is not capable of flying, half of our tanks are not available for service. Now, this is a nation of shopkeepers who keeps a kind of guard called NATO, and we make the minimal contribution. I think this is not going to work in the long run. America is weakened, overstretched. It has the pivot to Asia. The Americans have reduced their presence on the European continent massively. And we haven't lived up to the challenge.
But polls have shown over and over again that the German people are not willing to get engaged more militarily.
You need leadership in that case. You have to make it clear we are living in a dangerous world.
Can you ignore that as a politician? Can you ignore these polls?
No, you cannot ignore it, but you have to educate people. You have to explain to people what the situation is. Why can it be done by the Polish government and not by the German government? Why can it be done by the Brits? So I think for a long time we have hidden behind our constitution, which was a pretty empty, hollow pretext, and now we have nothing to hide. The fig leaves are off, and the military is not available for serious service. What we've seen in that little clip wasn't what I would call the core, the hard core of military service, but it was the periphery. And in the periphery, clinics and such things, we are quite good giving a little training here and there, sending, we are calling a military deployment of 3 people, 3 officers from the Bundeswehr. I wouldn't call it a military deployment, it's a kind of attaché service which we are doing. This is not good enough.
So Germany is shirking away from its responsibilities, says Michael Stürmer. Dorota, let's look at Ukraine, because you mentioned it. And Angela Merkel is trying to play a somewhat diplomatic role, assertive role, in being in constant telephone conversations anyway with Vladimir Putin. As somebody who's originally from Poland, are you satisfied with Germany's role vis-a-vis the Ukraine conflict? Or should Germany do enough? Should Germany do more?
Of course, Germany should do more. There is much too much concerns with the politics of Putin, with his aggressive nationalistic politics going into the Crimea and fighting in the Ukraine. There's a real war. And as I look at German papers, German media, there is rather strange information about everything what is going on in Ukraine. They were like, tries to make some appointments, some meetings or whatever, some politics, but it's not enough.
Once again, you see divisions of Germany with the Ukraine crisis. In East Germany, there's a lot more sympathy towards Russia and Putin. In the West, it's more towards the West. It's another one of those examples of divisions. But the Ukraine crisis is another example of Germany just not getting going. I mean, the Eastern European countries would love to see more NATO presence in Eastern Europe, right?
But they don't understand the complications. There's apprehension, fear, and all kinds of things. The eastern widening of NATO was accompanied with very firm promises on the non-deployment of nukes, the permanent deployment of troops, and the non-deployment of installations. No nukes, no troops, no installations. Now, if we, from our side, kind of throw these obligations out of the window, I think the situation, which is already very dangerous. I've been to Sochi and talked to Putin in the last fortnight. The situation is, objectively speaking, very, very much out of control. We are escalating. The East Russia is escalating militarily. We are escalating economically and financially. And okay, the Chancellor phones Putin every week or every fortnight. But what's the outcome? We are continuing to escalate. The Russians are continuing to escalate. People speak about the new Cold War. Well, the old Cold War had very firm rules. And if the Russian bomber detachment would have flown across NATO country to the west coast of Portugal, that would have meant World War III. Because the rules were there. And today we have a revolutionary situation. We have a wild situation, a wild contest, and that's very dangerous. And the only politician or statesman or stateswoman to intervene in this is Angela Merkel, and she has not lived up to the situation.
Well, if you look at what the German politicians are talking about, mainly the German media, they're focused on a balanced budget here in Germany. That's the main thing now. I mean, if a balanced budget is some kind of deterrent to Russian moves in Ukraine and Eastern Europe.
Well, the defense minister talks about Kitas, Kindertagesstätten, a kind of pre-kindergarten, nursery school. That's a great achievement for the military establishment in Germany.
Well, while Germany is being criticized, not just outside, but also on the show, from what I gather, about its lack of military engagement, it's certainly being criticized for throwing its weight around too much when it comes economically in Europe. There are fears that Germany is trying to dictate what course, economically speaking anyway, Europe will take over the next few years. Dorota, do you share that? Do you share that sentiment, that Germany is being too dominant when it comes to trying to solve the Euro crisis here?
I'm not sure about that. I remember a sentence of Polish Minister of Foreign Affairs, Radosław Sikorski. He was speaking here in Berlin at 2011, and he said the sentence, I'm less afraid about the power of Germany than about its indifference or passivity. And yes, on my opinion, it's we have nothing to be feared about.
It's a different question when you ask, for instance, a French person or somebody from Greece these days. Michael Stürmer, while Chancellor Merkel has been somewhat reluctant to take the lead in international affairs, in the Euro crisis, you can't really accuse her for not leading the way, can you?
Yes, but leading the way to where? More muddling through. You muddle through, you do more muddling through, and there is no solution. People expect a solution. There is no solution. We are going from one crisis to the next, and I would say if that is leadership, fine, so be it, but it's not creating trust. We were in 1990, we were in for a grand design of a Europe united through trust in a common currency, and the currency is terribly important for nations and for the union of different nations, and what we got is something which most Germans don't trust.
But Erik Kirschbaum, Italy, for instance, France, these countries are not happy about the way that Germany is trying to impose its will when it comes to saving the euro.
Forgive me.
So what's the catch?
We are not imposing our will. We are reminding people that they signed on the dotted line and that ever since things have been ignored.
Well, there's certainly differences in tactics on how to solve the euro crisis. Germany certainly has its blueprint. France, Italy certainly differ from that.
Right. Well, the old West Germany used to just write the checks. Helmut Kohl would put out the checkbook and write the check in Italy and Spain, and everyone would be happy. Because of East Germany, the cost of East Germany now and the cost of unification, Germany doesn't have a big checkbook anymore, and they can't start writing those checks the way Kohl used to. So that's part of the tension to begin with. Europe is used to Germany writing the checks. Germany doesn't want to write them anymore, which is fair enough. And that's a big part of the problem with the Eurozone crisis. You're right, it's a difficult situation. It's going to take a while to sort out. There's not really a lot of leadership, and there's a lot of muddling through. But you know, Germany talks about austerity and a balanced budget when the rest of Europe is going down the drain. And it's really, you could just imagine the way young French, young Italian, young Spanish people who are out of a job feel when they talk, if they look at the newspaper and see that Germany's focused on a balanced budget this year when they're all having such a tough time.
And on top of this, allowing ourselves some nice goodies like reduced pension age and all kinds of things that basically are luxuries in the eyes of our neighbors. But we are not imposing the German will. We are really saying, look, you signed and you better keep your promises. Now, the problem is, of course, that Germany and France were the first ones to break those promises. So we are in a bugger's muddle, to put it mildly.
Could it be, Dorota, that Germany, 25 years after reunification, is still underestimating its own influence in the world?
Underestimating, let me think. It could be, yes. It could be. I think there is a big burden of the World War II on Germany still, you know, like lying on the politics, the history of this place, of the country, which mounts the arms, mounts the hands. I feel it.
That's a good point. I feel Germany sometimes fears leadership as well. I mean, the whole German word Führung is just laden with history and fears. And yeah, I think 25 years after unification, maybe this is a good moment for Germany to take stock, and maybe we'll see more German leadership.
What kind of country would you like Germany to be?
It's not my decision. I mean, I like Germany the way it is, but I get annoyed sometimes when I see them, as you say, hiding behind their different constitutions and their different excuses to not do more.
So you want Germany to be more reassertive?
It would be beneficial for a lot of countries in Europe and probably around the world.
Michael Stürmer, 25 years after reunification, are you satisfied with the way Germany handles itself, both domestically and on the international front?
Yes and no. Domestically, I think things have been, on the whole, very successful. Internationally, no. I think we made a big mistake in the way we brought Russia in and not brought Russia in. Russia is now the one, the big bear is now the one to overthrow the European balance and really create a very dangerous situation. And that dates back at least 20 years ago. And we could have done better, but that was not, at the time, Germany was preoccupied with itself. And for the United States, the Soviet Union had disappeared. Russia is not being well understood in the US, although the best Russian scholars are at Harvard and Stanford and in Washington. It's a tragedy. That's where the weak point is. And we are now in a crisis where Germany could possibly, hopefully, have the key to some kind of a settlement, but the key has to be turned. The lock has to be found. And it's only Angela Merkel and not the very weak American president, let alone Cameron or the French side, to turn the key in the right direction. And the right direction means control that crisis and work for some kind of European settlement. I shy away from the word peace.
Dorota, 25 years now, we're marking the anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Let's look ahead here. What kind of country you think will Germany be in the next 25 years? How will Germany develop?
Oh, I'm supposed to play a prophet. Okay. Germany in 25 years. Germany could be, I suppose it will be a very international country. It will be a country where people from it will be an open country if it goes my way. If Germany can be much more open than it is now. I mean, things like that happen that the Polish people from Stettin, they buy houses and apartments in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern. They move from Poland because we are in Europe, you know, and can move where we want and work where we want. So that happens, that the people move all over the Europe. We may have much more people from Africa, Syria, from Arabic countries. So I see a very international future for Germany. The thing is, the big question is how the German can deal with this development. And if they open their hearts for foreigners or not. If they open their hearts for foreign cultures or not. If the people who come here open their hearts for German culture, for Germany, or not. It is a big question, I don't know, but I see Germany as a very international country.
Erik, one can argue that it took 25 years and a lot of money to make country, to turn Germany into the country that it currently is. Now you can say 25 years, it's a good starting point now to think about what kind of country the reunified Germany want to become in the future. What's your prediction 25 years from now, or throughout the next 25 years? Will we see any fundamental differences?
Well, 25 years ago, I thought that you wouldn't be talking about Ossi-Wessi anymore. I thought the divisions would be gone. So I don't make predictions anymore. It would be nice, though, to see a Germany in 25 years from now where you don't notice the difference between East-West, where all the paid the same, where people from the West want to go to see the East, where people in the East know more about the West and want to go there. That would be a nice thing to see in another 25 years. That the internal divisions, the walls and the heads are all gone.
What has surprised you the most throughout the last 25 years?
That there's still a lingering division, that young West Berliners they get lost when they go east of Alexanderplatz. That still surprises me, that they're not more curious to find out what's going on over there in the East and vice versa.
Michael Stürmer, your outlook on this nation that is increasingly playing a pivotal role, certainly in Europe and perhaps even the international arena. Do you think we will see some fundamental changes about the way this country portrays itself?
This country has enormous challenges, and it's not living up to it. The demographic challenge is much more serious than our politicians understand. They have shied away from the problem for the last 30 years. I've really been involved in that. We have a very serious problem of energy. The Energiewende, the turnaround of the energy policy has not been thought through. It's a fragment of a fragment and no more. So we have to watch out. Things are more uncomfortable than the present grand coalition, which is really for harmony and I scratch your back, you scratch my back.
It's like the grand coalition.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. We were born in the sign of the scales of balanced grand coalition, wall to wall, Volksgemeinschaft, yes, of course, but that doesn't solve any of those problems. It's the most comfortable way, and that's not the virtuous way. That's the comfort way, and that's not good enough for the biggest economy in Europe, the biggest country in Europe, the most populous country in Europe. There is a vacuum to be filled, and so far it's not in the nature of the Chancellor to fill that vacuum.
Dorota, if you had a wish on what should change 25 years after the two Germanys unified, if you had an opportunity to wish for one fundamental change in this country now that it is reunified, what would it be?
It would be the changes at universities, at schools. It is for me a very, very important question.
Erik?
Maybe that Germany's not so fantastic in soccer anymore and beat everybody else all the time.
That is true. We are dominating the nation in football. That is certainly. Michael Stürmer, if you had your pick on what to fix first and what to change about this country, or you can also say, I like it the way it is.
Reduce income tax.
Well, I'm not sure we're gonna see that anytime soon.
Never. Taxes in this country, we love our high taxes and we preserve them very carefully.
But will you celebrate? Will you celebrate this coming Sunday?
Of course, I'll celebrate. There's a lot to celebrate. I mean, this was the luckiest moment in German history for centuries.
I agree completely with that. I think that's one of the brightest moments in German history of all time, that the wall fell without a shot being fired. I had a chance to talk to the guard yesterday who opened the gate. I love this story. It's a great story, the way the wall came down without anybody getting hurt.
The wall came down, that much we know, 25 years ago, without a shot being fired, without anyone getting hurt. A beautiful moment that certainly we will commemorate and remember, not just on today's show, but in the following days. What kind of country Germany has become, we've talked about on today's show. We will, of course, see in which direction this country will move forward. I want to thank my guests for a very spirited discussion about a reunified country and the anniversary of the 25th anniversary of the falling of the Berlin Wall. Thank you out there for tuning in, and looking forward to seeing you again next week for a new edition of Quadriga.